about you, but the devil attacks electronics anytime, anyhow, and any way that I use them. And so today, I hope that our first time together, since it's the first of the month, that we could do something that is always, it's always fun for me, and I hope it's fun for you. But really, it's a thing that I have to do most of the time because I get so caught up in the fray of life that I forget to, I know where I am most of the time, but I forget to look back and see where it is that I've come from, and I lose my bearings. I don't know if anybody else has that happen, but if you live very long, the speed of the world, it seems like it's going faster and faster and faster, and I'm struggling and struggling and struggling to keep up with it, and most of the time I can't. And so I might think I'm going in the right direction, but turns out most of the time I'm going left when I should have been going right a long time ago. And so today we're going to look at one of my favorite Bible characters, and here's why he's my favorite Bible character, because from the book of Genesis, if you want to turn there, Jacob is one of my favorite Bible characters, and here's why. Genesis is a crazy book. Anybody read the first 12 chapters, you look at it and you kind of scratch your head and you don't really understand why it maybe is part of the Bible, but it's some really great stuff in there. And then you get to these fellows you hear about, Abraham, and we're celebrating Abraham throughout the entirety of the Bible and the entirety of our spiritual journey as Abraham's held up in the Scriptures, and even still today is what we're supposed to do for faith, right? And look in the Bible and it says, you want to know what faith is? Look at Abraham. This is how you do it. God speaks and you go. And I'm like, well, that was tougher than I thought. And then we see his son, right? We see his son Isaac, and Isaac, he has a time on the biblical stage of all of about 12 seconds. We know him best because he's going to be sacrificed, because God speaks to Abraham, and Abraham once again seems like he's just willing to do whatever God says, including sacrifice his own son. And I bet Isaac had some stories that never made it into the Bible about that. And it holds Isaac up and says, if you want to know what faith is like, this is the picture of it. Well, then Isaac has two boys, right? He has two boys, Esau and Jacob. And Jacob is how God's blessing for the entirety of the earth comes to us. But the Bible holds Jacob up and goes, and this boy needs some work. Like, he's not like his granddaddy and his daddy. If you want to know about faith, he'd do to watch, but I don't know that he's got it all figured out just yet. And I don't know about you and your Christian experience in your journey, but I'm more like Jacob. Like, I feel most of the time when God looks at me, he goes, I keep teaching you, I keep telling you, and you just aren't getting it. And he has to go back and retrain and reteach, and that's what you see in Jacob a lot of the time. Is Jacob he amplifies the what's in it for me mentality, right? And that's how he starts out in faith. And for me, as I reflect across my life journey and I look at Jacob's life journey, I find a lot of solace in the fact that God doesn't take the great words of the immortal theologian Marcel Ledbetter and look at me and go, it'd be easier to make a new one than it would be to clean you up. I take great solace in the fact that God doesn't do that. That God continues to patiently bear and shape and move and works out ahead of me. Hey, that's this whole Methodist thing we call grace, isn't it? That God goes out ahead of us and does a whole bunch of work in our lives and for us, even in advance of our knowledge of it or our ability to comprehend it. And then when we get there, we just happen to fall into God's grace. And we most of the time look around and go, I ain't all that bad. Forgetting the fact that God's been doing a work out ahead of us long before we ever got to a particular place. And that's what we see in Jacob today at the end of his, almost the end of his story in Genesis chapter 35. It reads this way in the beginning of the chapter. It said, God said to Jacob, verse 1, arise and go to Bethel. Bethel's a special place for Jacob. He says, dwell there and make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. And so Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, put away the foreign gods that are among you and purify yourselves and change your garments. Then let us arise and go to Bethel, where I will make an altar to the God who answered me in my days of distress and has been with me wherever I have gone." And so they gave Jacob all their foreign gods, all the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak, under the terebinth tree near Shechem. And as they journeyed, terror of God fell upon the cities that were around about all of them. So they did not pursue the sons of Jacob, because his sons were about to start a war. And Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, and he and all the people who were with him, and there built an altar and called the place El Bethel, in otherwise God place. Because therefore God had appeared to him, and when he had fled from his brother. Might God add his blessing to the reading of his word this morning. And by the way, if we miss a part, you'll have grace on the first day, won't you? Okay. Anybody know what time it is? Because when a preacher asks you what time it is, it matters, right? Oh, look, I can preach for another hour. Y'all going to have to loosen up. This is not going to go good for us together. So, somewhere in Jacob's journey, you know Jacob's story. Jacob, and we're going to cover in the next few weeks much of his story, but somewhere in Jacob's journey, he had to be confronted with this. Will this God who made promises to me really deliver? Will he really deliver? Because when God appears to him in a dream at Bethel originally, and it's what we all know as Jacob's ladder, right? If you read it in the Hebrew, it says that God, and this is in chapter 28, it says that God came and stood beside Jacob. And he's watching the angels go up and down between heaven. And I like to think that God didn't just stand beside him, but he looked at him and kind of put his arm around him and said, "Son, here we go." Because Jacob stole the blessing from his brother, and he's on the lam running for his life with the help of his own mom. And I like to think God puts his arm around him and says, "So here you go." And he makes all these great promises to Jacob. Now Jacob looks around and says, "Hey, if the God that will make these kind of promises, if he'll," do I cross something right here where it pops like that? I apologize. If he'll keep his promises, if he'll do this, then at some point I will make him my God. And today, if you don't get anything else out of what we talk about in our short time together, I want you to get this, is that in some point in your life, in my life, in everybody's life, all of us have to come to the point to decide whether or not God has delivered on everything he's promised you, and then what it demands from you. And in Jacob's story today, he has come to a point in his life where he has looked backwards. He's done this reflection thing, right? I love reflection. Particularly being an introverted guy, I live in the world of reflection. Because reflection is the context of perspective. It's where you gain some perspective on life. It's where you get to climb up into the balcony of life and look down across it, get off the playing field where you can't see anything but the skin of the elephant, and you get to climb up into the balcony and go, "Wow, I've been riding this giant elephant the whole time." Anybody else kind of find some real resolution to problems in your spiritual walk, in your Christian journey through reflection? You ever take the time to look at it? Well, this is where Jacob's got. And I like to think that somewhere along the journey, Jacob's looked backwards across this whole running from his brother and God delivering on his promises. And he's just really had to come to this decision point. Because he made God one promise at Bethel. "God, if you'll deliver on all the things you said you'll deliver, I'll make you my God. I'll make you my God." I love that Jacob does that. I love that Jacob does that. And what I love even more than that is that you and I have the opportunity today in the elements, in the Eucharist together, in communion together, to once again look at the promises of God and ask yourself the same question Jacob had to ask himself when God said, get up and go on back to Bethel. It's time to make good on what you said you'd make good on. It's an opportunity to reflect across this whole thing of following Jesus in your life and go, self, has Jesus really said that, lo, I will never leave you nor forsake you? Have you ever left me or forsaken me? Self, has Jesus ever not delivered on the promises he said he would deliver on in my life? Has he not been faithful? Called on his name, has he not been faithful to answer me? I think most of us want to suspend judgment sometimes and say, but he didn't answer everything. And I'm going to go back to the Methodist thing, right? Maybe he just hasn't answered it yet. The grace of God's out working ahead of you, right? It's like the great Wayne Gretzky said about, they asked him how it was he could score all these goals. Because most of you are skating to where the puck is. I'm skating to where the puck is. Now I got to hold still, and that's a problem for me. Now I might not even be able to operate this thing. Nope. But the great Wayne Gretzky said that most of you spend your time skating to where the puck is, but I spend my time skating to where the puck's going to be. And so today you have the opportunity once again to reflect on whether or not when you've called on the name of the Lord, if indeed he has missed your call or if he's just out ahead of you waiting for you to get to where you ought to be. For it's in the elements, friends, that we have this grand opportunity to look back across our lives and go, maybe there's something to this grace thing. Maybe there's something like, maybe he hasn't not answered me. Maybe I just not to the point that the answer's made itself clear. I don't know about you, but that frustrates me to no end. But in Jacob's story today, we also see, for those of us who, and I no longer take for granted that all of us in the seats in the local church are Bible-believing, Jesus-following people. All of us have the opportunity, just like Jacob, at some point in our life to look at this faithful, this God that all of us sing about and talk about and decide whether or not we want to make him our God. There are people in your life. There's people at home on the couch that you love dearly, that you've been praying and wearing the knees out of your pants to try to get them in a chair beside you this morning. And you've been praying basically that for them the same thing would happen that I think happens to Jacob right here. Jacob makes it official. He goes from being one of those grace takers to being one of those grace beneficiaries. He goes to being a person who's not just covered by God's grace anymore, but he's soaked in it and steeped in it, and he lives in it, and whatever God says, that's what he believes, and it doesn't matter anymore for Jacob. And every single person in this room, and every single person in your life, and every single person that you hope and pray for and love dearly has got to have an opportunity one of these days to come eyeball to eyeball with the same thing that Jacob does this morning. And Jacob has to decide whether or not this God that made promises to me, am I going to fulfill the vow I made to him? Am I going to make him my God? I wonder if Jacob heard Jesus' words rolling around in his head even before he even knew who Jesus was. Yeah, but you don't build a tower, old buddy, without counting the cost. But this morning, we have a grand opportunity to once again, climb up into the balcony of life, so to speak, in the Eucharist, in sharing in communion together, and be confronted with this question: has the Savior of the world been faithful to deliver on the promises he's made to you and I? And if he has, what does that require of me? Now, you all probably aren't like me, and that's a good thing. And here's why. You've probably never made promise after promise to God. I bet. You probably have never been in situations in life where you go, Lord, if you just let me get out of this. I didn't really pray that prayer till I had children. That's not true, but it sounded good. You know, if you got kids, you've made all kinds of promises to God. Lord, if you just let us get through this vacation without killing them. Some people who should be here today, y'all don't have to tell them we said this, but they're praying that prayer right now because they're on vacation. Instead of in church, pray for them. You know, some of you have prayed something like that. I've learned the subtle art of not liking people I don't even know. Because I've worked with people who have told me all about their spouse through the years, and I was like, you know what? I don't even really like them. They're awful. God, if you hear what they're saying, fix this. If you just fix this, I'd be happy. You know? Sometimes make all sorts of vows, right? Sometimes we make vows we'll love people our whole life. But then we're confronted with the realization that they don't love us no more. God, what am I supposed to do with that? How am I supposed to be faithful to you when they're not faithful to me? So we make all kinds of promises to God, can't we? And some of these days, I scratch my head and decide, well, what promises am I going to have to fulfill? What ones am I going to have to make good on? No, I don't know about any of that. I don't know about any of the promises that you might have made. But what I know is that today, again, in having the opportunity to come to the table of the Lord, we have the opportunity to reflect backwards across life and look for those places where God has been faithful to us. And to ask the same question. When we discover that he who is promised is faithful, what else is left for us to do but fulfill our vows? Maybe a long time ago you vowed, Lord, I'll love you if you'll save me. That's an easy promise to make, but it's a hard one to keep, isn't it? And so maybe today as you come to receive the elements, maybe it's the reminder that Lord, I vowed to love you and you only, the best way I knew how. And sometimes I don't always do that. Maybe it's a reminder once again that you fill in the blank. Or for some of you, it may have been the opportunity like Jacob has today. When you come to the table, it might be the opportunity for you to finalize it, to take that next step, to make it from this Jesus following thing to this Jesus lover thing. To say, you know what? I'll make you my God. These people sing and dance and shout and run around and go to Mexico, and you hadn't lived unless you pushed mud in a wheelbarrow. And they do all that great stuff. Why do they do that? You must be trustworthy. Maybe today's the day you want to come to the altar when you receive the elements, because in the United Methodist Church we have what's called an open table, and we don't think you got to jump any hoops or be fixed right or clean yourself up or have all the tire cleaned off of you or anything else. We think you come as you are. That's why we sing the song, Just As I Am. But we often miss this in the Methodist Church. Communion is a converting ordinance. And I warn you fairly, if you come with a broken spirit and a broken, contrite heart, as David said in Psalm 51, if you come genuinely seeking to find the one who is faithful, I promise you he will meet you in these elements, and you will go away in a different position relative to your relationship with God than you came. Translation, you may come unredeemed. You may go away completely redeemed. Thank you. Because that's what this is. This is what this whole operation's about, isn't it? It's all about grace. It's about the grace that Jacob had to reflect on. It's about the grace you have to reflect on this morning. And it's about the grace that will continue to shape and mold us and conform us to the very image of the high and holy one, who has proven, and we stand in his proven reputation, to do what he says he will do. And he will not stop until he loves us into being completely lovely. Now, I don't know what kind of hope you were looking for this morning, but that's a hopeful thing for me. For an old boy that most of the time looks like Jacob, that if I were in the Bible, they'd hold me up and go, He leaves more dents than he does marks. But to see that the God of all creation would take the time and the grace to call me to a place that I could say, that's my God. And to make it so where I could come and meet him this morning here at the altar. What's left for you to do but fulfill your vows? Friends, again, I extend to you, communion in the United Methodist Church, Eucharist, is an open event. It's an opportunity, a place for you to reflect on this journey we call life and see yet how the grace of God continues to shape and mold you and call you home. You don't have to have any particular beliefs, structures, or thoughts. But you do need to have a heart that's genuinely seeking and searching for something. And from the words of the preacher, that something will find you if you come that way. Well, those of you who are going to serve with me this morning, would you please come forward?